Good morning, welcome back everyone. So, after the long interval, this summer recess, we are resuming these Sunday lectures. And normally, the first Sunday lecture after the summer recess would be on some topic related to Lord Sri Krishna. So, this time we have a very interesting subject which is not frequently discussed, but it is very significant for us to keep this in mind to understand the true message of the great text Bhagavad Gita. Why did Sri Krishna choose Arjuna as his disciple for teaching the Bhagavad Gita? So that's the topic. There are 5 brothers, Pandava brothers. The eldest Yudhishthira and the youngest Sahadeva. So Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula and Sahadeva. These are the 5 Pandava brothers. Now, they were brothers, they were of different temperaments. And some of the commentators briefly mentioned the uniqueness of Arjuna. It's called Madhyama Pandava, means the middle brother. Means the eldest was Yudhishthira, then Bhima, then Arjuna, then Nakula, and then Sahadeva. So Lord Krishna did not choose the eldest. In fact, of the 5 brothers, the wisest and the most learned among them was the eldest Yudhishthira. In fact, Lord Krishna doesn't teach anything in the Bhagavad Gita which Yudhishthira actually did not know. Yudhishthira was himself a philosopher. He was a learned person and he was well known for his wisdom, his poise, his maturity. So there are dozens of verses in the Mahabharata which describe the qualities of Yudhishthira as a human being. He was very compassionate. Do you remember, it was the end of the Mahabharata. Yudhishthira was accompanied by a dog to heaven. He was being led to heaven. And then, actually, the dog was an angel, a deva coming in disguise, who wanted to test Yudhishthira. As the doors of the heaven opened, Yudhishthira first wanted the dog who accompanied him to be admitted first before stepping into the heaven. So that is the type of man Yudhishthira was, a compassionate person like a Buddha. And also very learned, a great philosopher, and highly respected by not only his friends but also by his enemies. But he was not chosen. The second brother was Bhima. He was more of a man of brawn than brain. He was more of a warrior. Not only physically but also mentally, a straightforward person, the type of person who won't speak much because they can't speak much. They were not so learned in that intellectual sense. He was an extremely nice, compassionate person, but he was not conventionally, he was not a conventional wise man like Yudhishthira was. The 4th brother was Nakula. He was a bit too young and certainly not as learned or as mature perhaps as his elder brothers. And Sahadeva was the youngest. So, among these 5 brothers, Sri Krishna chooses Arjuna as a disciple. There is a very important reason for that, and that aspect of the Gita has got a great message for all of us even in this 21st century. Yudhishthira was a very wise person, very learned person, but when you reach a state of intellectual scholarship, logical reasoning, fineness of perception and cognition, you may sometimes, not always, but you may sometimes step into a state of inactivity, passivity, or insensitivity. That was really the problem with Yudhishthira. This problem was raised later on in the Mahabharata on many occasions. Even Kundi, Yudhishthira's mother, the mother of the 5 brothers, had to chastise him for his inactivity and lack of dynamism and energy and a sense of righteousness, a willingness, a dynamism to act upon a principle, not only to understand a principle. It's not enough for us to intellectually understand a philosophy or an ideal and then be convinced about it in our own private mental world. That's not enough. That is necessary. But that intellectual conviction should express itself in our activity, and what kind of activity it may depend upon the status or your job, your responsibility. Suppose you are a policeman, let us say. You are a policeman. And you learn ahimsa paramo dharma. Non-violence is a great ideal. Non-violence was preached and practiced by Gandhi, Buddha, Christ, Sri Ramakrishna, all the great teachers of the world. Want something very unique, one common central philosophy to all higher religions, whether it's Hinduism or Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism, it is non-violence. And that is the first spiritual discipline recommended in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Ahimsa, Satya. That's how it begins, Yama Niyama. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shauja, Santosha, Tapaswadhyaya, Isa Pranidhana. Non-violence is the first spiritual ethical principle we should follow. Okay, now this is okay. But now, how do you place non-violence? Let us say in the philosophy of a policeman or a soldier who is paid by the state to look after poor people, look after the weak, to take care of the law and order. If that policeman starts practicing non-violence, his result will be there will be an increase in violence. There will be an increase in violence all over the society. The whole country will collapse and may degenerate into violence. If the policeman, I'm giving an archetypal example, or a soldier who is expected to practice violence to prevent violence. Okay, to remove violence, he has to practice violence. If a policeman forgetting his duty is like a teacher telling, I won't teach anyone. Or if you go to a barber shop and he says, no, I won't do my work. If you are a student and you say, I won't study. If you are a doctor and you say that I won't treat you, you tell a patient, it's wrong. So like that, if a policeman says, no, I won't act to defend the poor and the weak, then that person is actually not only promoting violence, but practicing violence. This is an intricate principle in the Bhagavad Gita. So Yudhishthira had this problem. He studied and thought and contemplated and finally decided to do nothing. So that kind of study and contemplation is not only unproductive but can be sometimes self-defeatist. The second brother was Bhima. Bhima, as I mentioned earlier, was more of a man of energy. He was a warrior. So certainly, obviously, he won't understand the intricacies of Swadharma, one's duty, responsibilities, karmanneva adhigaraste ma phaleshu kadajana Ma karma phala hedu bhur maste sangostu akarmani. Lord Krishna says in the Gita, karmani evate adhikarga. Your duty, your responsibility is only with your work, with your responsibility. You should not aspire for the results. Ma karma phala hedu bhuhu mate sangostu akarmani. That's also saying you should not be attached to action, but you should not be attached to inaction either. It's clearly stated. Now, some of this is swadharma, doing one's duty as an act of worship. Do whatever may be your responsibility, do it sincerely, with enthusiasm, with honesty and integrity, and a sense of sanctity. That is swadharma. There are, of course, other innumerable philosophical themes that we find in the Gita. We are actually, for the last 2 years, we have been conducting series of Gita classes every Friday, 7:30. We'll resume with the next Friday. So that's a different subject. Now, Bhima was intellectually not qualified. I mean, he was not of the temperament. He would not understand the intricacies of the teachings of the Gita. So he was left out. So Yudhishthira was left out because he will understand intellectually, but will not act upon it. Yudhishthira will certainly agree with whatever Lord Krishna would have taught him, but then he would have gone to sleep. Of course, remember, we should not have a wrong estimate of Yudhishthira as a human being. He was very compassionate, very wise, very learned. But there was this flaw in Yudhishthira. So Mahabharata, you should understand Mahabharata as a unique literary classic. It actually brings out the intricacies of human psyche, emotions and feelings. So, except one character, Lord Krishna, all other characters, and there are hundreds of characters in the Mahabharata, all other characters had some minor flaw or other. And many of them were, of course, villains, like Duryodhana, Dushasana, and so on. Even the greatest of these characters, like Bhishma, had some minor flaw. And Yudhishthira had this problem. He will understand, he will agree, but he will not have the energy, the integrity to immediately act upon it. So a very high ideal without a realistic implementation is of not much use. And now we come to Arjuna. Arjuna is very often described as a prototype of the average human being. Learned in his own way, sincere, earnest. I'm talking about the normal human being who pays his taxes, who does his duty properly, who may be a good husband or good wife, good mother or good father, good brother, good sister, whatever may be. A normal, cultured, refined human being. Now, Arjuna in many ways represents the commonality of human race. He was a good man, but he had problems in his mind. What to do, what not to do. If somebody could tell him, no, you should do this, he will do it. If somebody could tell him, no, you should not do this, he would do that. But he will think, he will argue with you because he's sincere. He doesn't argue with you because he wants to argue. He wants to argue with you because he wants to understand more of what he's listening to. So he was the typical normal, ideal, good person in society. I mean, a person who wants to do good things, if he could know how to do good things. So, Krishna found Arjuna to be the right person. If you can teach a person, such a person, who is in search of something practical, something that he is ready to work hard to practice if properly taught, if properly convinced, that was the kind of man Arjuna was. Now that is the uniqueness of Arjuna as a human being. Now, and where did this Krishna's preaching of the Gita take place? In Kurukshetra. So Kurukshetra is a place maybe around 80 kilometers from Delhi to northwest, maybe towards the west, and the place is known as Kurukshetra. So actually, it is located in a very auspicious part of ancient India. It's in between the two rivers, Yamuna and Saraswati. Saraswati river you don't find today. It has dried up, so you don't find the river. But the ancient texts of Hinduism refer to this sacred river called Saraswati. So that's the place where Kurukshetra is located. And it is defined in the Manusmriti. Kurukshetram cha matsyascha panchalaka shurasenakaka eshu brahmasya desho vai brahmavarta danantara edad desha prasudasya sakashat agrajanmanaka swam charitram siksheran prithivyaha sarvamanavaka. So a very famous definition of the locality where Kurukshetra was situated in Manu's important work, Manusmriti. So it was located between these two regions. Now, the ancient lawgiver Manu says, people lived in those regions at that time, in those times, were ideal human beings. They practiced higher values, spiritual values in their everyday life. They tried to bring in higher ideas, higher spiritual values in their everyday secular activities. And so they were called Arya. I mean, in the sense they were noble in their departments, compassionate, noble, cultured, refined, practicing non-violence and all those qualities. So that was the place where this event took place. Now, the reason why this particular place was considered to be important was, it's a place where dharma was the subject of conversation among scholars, even among common beings. Dharma means our duty or responsibility, what is appropriate for us to do on certain occasion, depending upon the time, circumstances, people around, and so on. So what is one's proper duty, responsibility, righteousness? That was the central topic that dominated the lives and thoughts of people living in that region. And that happens to be part of the most important teaching of Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita teaches many things. It teaches Advaita, it teaches Visitadvaita, it teaches devotion, philosophy, yoga, so many things. In fact, the commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita are so innumerable and so in so many languages. The most authentic commentaries are, of course, in Sanskrit, beginning with the most authentic commentary of Shankaracharya in 8th century AD. But so as I mentioned, dharma or duty, righteousness, these are some of the topics that dominated the lives and in fact the lives and culture of that region. And that is the central topic in the Bhagavad Gita. And that dharma, in its actual form, practical form, takes the form of Swadharma. So dharma means one's own duty. Depending upon position, either in family, playing different roles, father, mother, brother, sister, and so on, or in society, playing different roles in society, like maybe a doctor or an engineer or teacher or a student or a mechanic or whatever may be. So we have different duties and responsibilities in the family structure, family setting, and also in the social setting, and also as a citizen we have certain duties, sacred duties and responsibilities. So duties from the individual point of view and duties from the perspective family context, family setting, and then from the social standpoint or also from the national standpoint, and certain fundamental values that as human beings we uphold and try to practice. All these constitute different aspects of dharma, but dharma actually takes the form of duty or karma in our everyday life. And the most important teaching of Bhagavad Gita is duty or dharma. May call it swadharma or swakarma, whatever you may call. Now, what was Arjuna's problem? Arjuna's problem was he knew he was supposed to do a duty and he found it very unpleasant. It's not because he thought he was incompetent, because he had proved his competence on so many occasions in the past. But due to let's say an emotional crisis, he became so confused, so perplexed that he didn't know what to do. Well, it is something very similar. Let us imagine. The closest parallel that I can give from modern context is this. As I mentioned earlier, suppose a guard or security guard is employed in a place to keep order, and there is an unruly mob approaching, and if the security guard doesn't do his duty, then the unruly mob can do mischief, create a lot of problems. Suppose the security guard says, no, I should not do anything, I should keep quiet, I should practice non-violence, I should practice inaction, because I should not do anything. First of all, he will be dismissed. Secondly, as a human being, he is degrading himself. As I mentioned earlier, it is worse than a teacher who is paid by the university or a school say, then I won't teach students. It's worse than that, because the consequences will be much more serious in the former case. That is what happened to Arjuna. So you should remember, Gita mentions this battlefield. Many commentators in later times, like Vinoba Bhave, mostly modern commentators like Aurobindo, Vinoba Bhave, and Mahatma Gandhi, who belong to the modern generation of commentators, who try to give an interpretation of the Gita and its teachings more suitable to modern times, but still based on the ancient teachings. So they say, the battlefield that's mentioned in the Gita is our own mind. In fact, that's what is happening. Arjuna is suddenly caught between two conflicting, highly confusing ideas, whether I should do my duty or not. Just like the security guard I referred to just now. And then he says, and some of the people with whom he had to fight were his own friends, his own cousins, and so on. So in the 28th verse, Dushtramam sujanam Krishna yutsum samuvasthitam sidanti mamagatrani mukhamcha varisushyadi pebadusya sarire me roma harsasya jayade gandivam samsade hasta tuchaiva paridakhide. This is how Arjuna begins his dialogue. This is the beginning of Arjuna's conversation in the Gita. What it says is, look here Krishna, I am seeing around me my own people, imam sujanam drishtva. I'm seeing all these people who are my own cousins and relatives around me. I'm becoming weak. My weapons are falling through my fingers. I can't do my duty of protecting the good people, the weak, the women folk, the children, from evildoers. I can't do that. And then he goes on giving a philosophical justification for his inaction. That is much more terrible. And he says, he had come to the battlefield to do his duty, to get the kingdom that belongs to his mother, his brothers, which is taken away from him. Now he says, no, I won't do anything. Again, you should remember, Gita is only creating a context, and the battlefield is our own heart, our own mind. Every cultured, civilized human being will feel this conflict. Remember, only cultured human beings will feel this conflict. It takes a lot of culture and inner refinement to be able to feel this conflict between whether it is proper for me to do it or not. Those who are very, very, I don't say low, but very much far behind in the evolution, they will feel absolutely no conflict. Hardened criminals, they have no conflict. So also the highest spiritual persons like a Buddha or Christ or Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, no conflict. So conflicts are only for sincere spiritual seekers and aspirants, or those who are eager to practice some higher values in their life. So Arjuna represents that group. So he feels this inner conflict. So he thought inaction or running away from his own sacred duty and responsibility is the most wonderful solution to the problem. Suppose we are to do a work as part of our duty. You may be a doctor and it may involve some unpleasant duties, perhaps as part of your responsibility, official, professional responsibilities. You can resign that job, that's perfectly okay. But remaining within the job, remaining in the job, you can't say, I won't do that. That's wrong. So, in the case of Arjuna, he was supposed to do a work and he was preparing himself all his life for this occasion. At that moment, he became weak and he became confused. Again, we should remember, to be able to be confused, to feel this inner conflict, that should be our goal, because if we feel a conflict within us, it is a green signal that we have made some progress in spiritual life. This is an important message of the Gita. So, and then the first chapter, it says, Evam tu Arjuna sankhe ridhobustu va visudhya sasaram chapam choka samvikna manasa. I'm referring to this verse. If you, those who are interested, you can refer to the 47th verse of the first chapter. The previous verse that I referred to was the 28th. That's the beginning of the dialogue in the Gita, at least Arjuna's conversation. Declaration of his own psychological problems. He was feeling kind of withdrawal symptom, depression, inner conflicts. And he concludes the author concludes the first chapter by saying that Arjuna became so dejected, so confused, he simply sat on the chariot saying that he won't do anything. Now, this Arjuna, you know what happens to him at the end? At the end of this, of the 18th chapter, Gita has got 18 chapters. At the end of the 18th chapter, 63rd verse is important. There, Arjuna tells Krishna, after listening to the whole teaching, Nashto moha smidil labdha tat prasada mayachyuda sthidosmi gata sandeha karishe vajanam tava. What effect was produced in Arjuna's mind after listening to the teaching of Gita is clearly shown in this 73rd verse of the 18th chapter, verse 73rd, 18th chapter. Nashto moha smidil labdha tat prasadat mayachuna. Lord Krishna, by your grace, my confusion is gone. I have got back my sense of propriety, what is right for me to do, a sense of duty. Now my mind has become steady. I shall act according to your instructions. This is 73rd verse. So we are approaching the end of the text. And then after that, Arjuna tells, I shall do exactly what you mentioned. Of course, remember, before Arjuna made this statement, I am now totally free from all confusions. Now I am totally free from all inner conflicts. I shall act according to your instruction. Now, before making this statement, Krishna diligently asked one question to Arjuna. What's the question? Kachideda sudam partha toya ekagrena chedasa kachid ajnana sammoha pranastaste dhananjaya. Arjuna, did you listen to me carefully? Did you properly understand what I said? Are you now free from your confusions and inner conflicts? This question is put to Arjuna. In answer to this question, Arjuna says, Nashto mahasmidil labdha tat prasadar mayachula siddhosmi gata sandeha karishe vajanam tava. Now I am free from all inner conflicts and confusions. And then the Gita concludes in the 18th chapter, in the 78th verse, Gita concludes, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara Tatra Sri Vijayo Bhodhir Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. This is very important to understand. In fact, we should remember the importance of the last verse, that is 78th verse of the 18th chapter. Wherever there is Krishna, the Yogeshwara, the personification, the Lord of Yoga, the embodiment of Yoga. Yoga here means spiritual wisdom that guides our everyday life, our actions, thoughts and words and feelings. That spiritual wisdom is the real implication of the word yoga in this particular text, that is 78th verse of the 18th chapter. Wherever this Lord Krishna, that is wherever the wisdom of yoga, and Arjuna, who is a representative, who is a symbol of action, duties, sense of duty and responsibility, action and contemplation. Wherever there is this wonderful blend of action and contemplation, spiritual wisdom and practical efficiency, the highest spiritual ideal and the highest realistic approach to everyday life situations, wherever there is a harmony of these two ideals, there will be Sri, means prosperity. Vijaya means victory and expansion, development, and also a proper social order, proper moral, ethical, social order. So that means for harmonious life, where we have no problem with what we have to do with regard to what we feel we should do, when we feel a conflict between what we want to do and what our mind perhaps may allow us to do. Our mind may not always allow us to do what we want to do. Whenever there is a conflict, we should remember this. Dynamism is not enough. Arjuna had dynamism, but dynamism alone may not really be helpful, because dynamism also can create conflicts. And when you have this conflict, your dynamism is gone. You pour cold water. You're very energetic, very efficient, very enthusiastic, very active. But suppose you're facing a conflict, this is some kind of a setback, everything is gone. So that is a big problem here. So for that we need a sound philosophy of life. That is yoga, the wisdom of yoga. So that is the real essence of Gita. And Arjuna was the only person who could have properly understood the essence of this. Yudhishthira was so much steeped in wisdom and was not very mindful of the need for activity and enthusiasm and efficiency. Bhima was, of course, steeped in action. He would not have understood the message of yoga or spiritual wisdom. Nakula and Sahadeva, of course, they were still growing up. So Arjuna was the one person who represents all of us in the Gita. All the questions that Arjuna is asking is putting to Krishna. Any of us, any sincere spiritual seekers amongst us could have asked Lord Krishna. All these questions are very rational questions. See, Arjuna asked this question. Oh Lord Krishna, you say we have to control the mind, we have to control the senses. We should be able to restrain our mind. Then Arjuna asked this question. Well, mind is like a strong wind. You cannot tie the wind. You cannot restrain the wind. You cannot restrain the mental thoughts, the thoughts and impulses and feelings going on in the mind. When you are agitated, when you are facing a conflict, a lot of confusion, a number of conflicting thought currents pass through the mind. Our mind, you say you should control the mind. It's just like asking you to control the wind, which you can't do. Again, another question. He asked Krishna. Of course, I am not giving the answer. We have already discussed this in our regular Friday classes, which is going on for the last 2 years. Every Friday, 7:30. Another question Arjuna is, he could have asked this question. Arjuna is asking the question, well, Lord Krishna, suppose I pray and meditate, but I suppose I don't succeed in controlling the mind, restraining my senses, in practicing the spiritual wisdom in our everyday life. And we can't live eternally. One day we'll die. And before our death, if we don't realize this wisdom, does it mean that all my efforts have gone in vain? Instead of working hard to pile up wealth, I spend a part of my energy and time for practicing spiritual ideals. So, if I don't fully succeed, it means if I don't become a Buddha in one life, that's what it means. Does it mean that everything will be lost? Krishna tells you, no. Whatever you have done in this life, you won't lose. Everything will be yours. You have already created a spiritual bank balance. That will be yours. And you'll be reborn again. Then you will continue a spiritual journey from where you have left in this life. So, ayadi saddhayo pedo yoga chalidamanasaha aprapya yoga samsiddhim ka gadim Krishna gacchati. Arjuna is asking this question in the 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga. A person who doesn't succeed is ayati, man, not able to restrain the mind and senses. Suppose he dies without achieving anything, everything gone. No, he says no. He'll be reborn again. Purvabhyasena tayanaiva hriyadesi apashopisaka. I mean, whatever you have done in your previous life, that will be yours when you are born again. No, there are many interesting questions in the Gita. All these questions could have come only from a person who represents all of us. Because all spiritual seekers go through this traumatic period of self-doubts, inner conflicts and confusions. And all those questions are answered in the Gita. Again, this karma, that's a very interesting aspect in the Gita. Krishna doesn't begin his answers his response to Arjuna's questions with an exposition of Karma Yoga. That's something very interesting. Karma Yoga is preached only later. In the first chapter, you find Arjuna steeped in total confusion, totally confused. And he was trying to run away from his duties and responsibilities because he thought he can solve the problems of action by running away from action. That was what he thought as a solution, as a remedy to the problem of action. Because every activity creates some problem, some challenges in your own profession. Not only your profession, your domestic life situations. There is not a single activity which doesn't produce some kind of challenges. It's part of every action. Arjuna thought he can avoid these challenges and these problems by skipping his duties, by completely running away from his duties and responsibilities. So, what was the medicine that Lord Krishna prescribed to Arjuna for this disease? Strong action. Do something, maybe with some strong motive. You should be active. So, a lazy man should first of all begin his spiritual journey by practicing dynamic action. Then only he can remedy the problem of laziness or inaction. The solution to the disease of inaction is action or activity. So Sakama Karma is the first prescription from Lord Krishna. Because Arjuna's disease was total inaction. Then Krishna says, well, if you go on doing Sakama Karma, suppose you go on doing work with a strong motive, with a strong purpose, with a definite motive. Maybe we may want to become rich and powerful and efficient and successful and so on. But then at some point you may find, well, all these things will disappear one day. The richest man is not the happiest man in the world. The most successful person, successful in the ordinary empirical sense, are not necessarily successful because the success is only partial or lopsided because they are not able to enjoy their success. People who are fabulously successful in business and industry may have to take tablets for taking 4 hours sleep because of inner conflicts. So success is not so much of a success in their life. So something else is needed. Yoga is needed. So Lord Krishna says, instead of Sakama Karma, you should practice Karma Yoga. Yoga means spiritual wisdom. It means you do your duty. All duties and responsibilities should be performed efficiently. At the same time, you should know the limitation of the so-called success in the empirical worldly sense. That's not enough. So, you should also practice a higher ideal because activity produces problems, anxieties and worries and concerns and so on, sleepless nights, anguish and so on. So, in order to avoid the problem, we should practice detachment, non-attachment, so to speak. Gandhi's interpretation of the whole teaching of Gita was Anasakti Yoga, means the yoga of non-attachment. And he was busy. He was perhaps the busiest man for at least for 50 years in India. For half a century, from maybe right from 1910 up to 1948, the busiest man in India was Gandhi. And he said that the Gita's teaching is Karma Yoga, means Anasakti Yoga. Karma Yoga, action combined with non-attachment. And this is the judgment of the busiest man. Maybe he was perhaps the busiest man in the whole world, because even when he was fasting for 21 days, 15 days, whatever it is, he was busy. So that is needed. Along with activity, we should also need a psychological tool to save us from the problems of activity. That is non-attachment. And when this happens, we will be able to spiritualize our secular activities. Even the so-called worldly activities or secular activities can be given a spiritual orientation. Because the moment you bring non-attachment, every activity becomes a spiritual activity. Even the so-called worldly activities become spiritually oriented when you practice non-attachment. The reason why I am referring to Gandhi is, Gandhi was not a man who lived in a forest or a hermitage. He was leading in whole nation, leading agitations against the colonial rulers, and practically he was maybe even, that's why once he said, it is said, Gandhi was defined as a politician among saints and as a saint among politicians. I mean, a saint agitating, leading an agitation against the government, leading a processions and rallies, and how can such a person be a saint also? Gandhi is an example. And Gandhi said, you can do all this, but you should be detached. You should be non-attached. So that is needed if for a businessman, for a student, for a teacher, also for an industrialist, for anyone, even this 21st century. I say psychological tool that will help you in times of problems that normally accompany every person who become extremely successful in worldly pursuits. That is the real. Now, that's a real message of Gita, and perhaps Arjuna in many ways represents these modern high-tech CEOs. He was the embodiment of efficiency. He was the embodiment of practicality, enthusiasm. He was the embodiment of the Rajoguna. Such a man became suddenly inactive because he became totally confused. Because he was not just an active man, he was a man with noble heart. He had a sense of duty. He had a sense of responsibility. And he was the embodiment of many ethical qualities, moral qualities. Such persons will naturally feel, well, am I actually doing what is proper? I should not deviate from propriety. Am I doing the right thing? This thought may come. And it came to Arjuna, and so Krishna chose him as his disciple for teaching the Bhagavad Gita. We can have interaction maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. You are most welcome to ask questions. Yogesh, perhaps you can help. There is any help needed?
Yes, Swamiji, I'm monitoring YouTube as well. Go ahead, Mark. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Good morning, Maharaj.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you for your inspiring talk this morning.
Thank you.
What came up for me was, as I was looking at the Bhagavad Gita, verse 70 and 71, I have a translation that you recommended for me from Swami Tattwamayananda.
Which chapter?
18.
Okay, 18th. Okay. Yeah.
70 and 71.
Yeah.
It is my view that he who studies this conversation between us should be regarded as adoring me with a sacrifice of knowledge.
Yeah.
71. Even a man who listens to this holy conversation between us with deep faith and receptivity shall attain to liberation and the happy regions open to righteous men. My question is about listening to the Guru Gita, not the Bhagavad Gita,
Yeah.
To the Sanskrit version, even though one does not understand really what the meaning is.
Yeah.
Is it still beneficial to listen to the recording of a pundit or one of these people chanting the Guru Gita? Because I have a copy of it, but I'm not sure whether it's beneficial to listen to it. What is your opinion?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very, in some ways, it's a very profound question. It may look a bit simple question, but it's got a deep spiritual implication. Now, the sound has got different dimensions. And its most insignificant dimension is verbal meaning. Now, you see, for example, a sound can be a sound in a word. Let's say word. I won't say sound or sentence or any a verse, a hymn, or sound system can be translated into any language, more or less. But 100% accurate translation is very difficult, especially with regard to classical text. Now, suppose a person has no scope to listen to the original sound and understand properly. That person should listen to the meaning of that verse, and then if he listens to that original Sanskrit sound, it will have a spiritual impact. You know how this happens? Words accumulate a peculiar spiritual potency when it is read with a sense of sanctity by sages for thousands of years. So those words which are read, recited by sages for thousands of years, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and humility, those words themselves accumulate a potency. That potency, that meaning, that potency doesn't necessarily come from the superficial dictionary meaning of those words. When you meditate upon a sacred sound symbol, that sound symbol accumulates this. And later when you read it or when you listen to it, chant it, even though you may not be able to fully understand it, but you know the translation meaning, of course, then it will have a benefit. That is true. So we should always remember, words, the significance of words should not be limited to their vocabulary meaning or their translatable, version. What is translatable is only one aspect. There is something beyond the possibility of translation. So even if you don't really connect with the language as such, if you listen to it, the Sanskrit verses do have a spiritual benefits. That's true. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning, Maharaj.
Good morning. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Kranti Bhushan from Hyderabad, India.
Yeah, most welcome.
Yeah, as you said that Arjuna is appropriate person. My doubt for asking the profound questions, my doubt is Sri Krishna can guide Nakula or Sahadeva. They were youngsters, no, Swamiji, and they could have understand, they could have guided in better way. I think so.
Yeah,
Is my doubt is clear?
Yeah. Okay. Very clear. In order to be benefited by an instruction, you should feel a strong need for that instruction. Unless you feel an urge for instruction, you won't be benefited by that instruction. Suppose Lord Krishna had just called Nagula and Sakadeva, come on, and sitting in his room, come on, I shall teach you philosophy. He could have taught, and maybe they could have even intellectually understood, but that won't have the practical benefit of it. So that's an important thing, because Nagula and Sakadeva perhaps were not mature enough to feel that kind of strong inner conflict. So the kind of conflict that Arjuna had can come only to a man of action. And still he suddenly becomes inactive due to an inner confusion. At that point only this kind of instruction can work. So among the 5 Pandavas, Arjuna was the most active person, active in a very comprehensive sense. Follow? So that's an important thing. So unless the aspirant feels an urge, a need, a strong need for instruction, no instruction can really be effective. It is an important thing to remember. Is that clear to you?
Yes, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you.
Swamiji.
Thank you.
I got that out because though Arjuna has all the ethical qualities, he only confused and conflicted. And what about Nagula and Sahadeva? That's what.
Yeah, actually, this conflict comes because Arjuna was essentially a man of dynamism and energy. Nagula and Sakadeva are not so well known as active persons in the Mahabharata context. They were good people, but they were not. Their names don't occur as frequently as Arjuna's name. Okay, there are many other characters. Thank you.
Swamiji, I wanted to ask a question on behalf of Sunil Kapadia.
Yeah.
It says, if the battlefield represents the conflict in our mind, what role do the Kauravas represent in that?
Yeah, Kauravas represent the negative, what we normally call in modern times is, though it's not a very helpful term, called negativity. I mean, there's a natural urge in many people to do the wrong thing or to avoid doing the right thing. That's very much there. Yoga Sutra would say due to samskaras, unhelpful, negative samskaras already accumulated in the mind. So Kauravas in a way represent the negativity aspect of the human mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Thank you. Anyway, but some of the questions were very, very thoughtful and very helpful in throwing further additional light on the subject. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
This is Satish Chauhan from Vallejo. May I ask a question?
Please.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, Swamiji, in your opening comments, when you mentioned the role or the role of a policeman in society, where he has to engage in acts that may be construed as violence. When is the line drawn here as to how far is this violence karma yoga, and where does it fall into where it is considered non-karma?
Yeah. Really speaking, duty is an important thing to do. So one's own duty, your duty that you are expected to do in terms of your qualification, your status, your position in society. As a policeman or a security guard is expected to do his duty, and that could involve some exercise of violence so that he can prevent more violence, because he can save more people from unfortunate consequences. So if he becomes inactive, like Arjuna wanted to be inactive, then it can lead to much worse consequences. So indirectly he becomes responsible for all for this worse consequences that could be the result of his inaction. So the point of demarcation is whether it is my duty. Again, you may ask the question, how do we know, how do we define duty? See, a doctor, you're right, a doctor has to do his work. It's obvious. A student has his duty, a professor has his duty, policeman has his duty, a soldier has his duty, a security guard has duty, an engineer has his duty, like that. So the duty may be in terms of our fitness or qualification, the job that is assigned to us by society or state or by family. In family context also there is duty. So and also our own fitness, our own qualification, which make sure that we get that duty because we are employed by the state or society for doing that particular job. So that also is linked to our preparation or qualification or fitness. So essentially, whether it's duty or not. Remember, there is something very interesting about this. Vedanta tells you that, and Yoga Sutra also tells you that, in normal human beings, our own sense of inner conscience, our own inner conscience will guide us if we live a ethical, moral life. Our own mind will tell us this is not right, this is right. Actually, this really happened to Arjuna, but Arjuna was in need of an instruction from a higher teacher, so he turned to Krishna. That's the context. Arjuna, that's why I said Arjuna represents the majority of people in society. They live normal lives, they do their duty, they pay their taxes, they are very law abiding, and they are good, reliable people, ideal citizens of the state, ideal members of the family, ideal members of the society, and so on. Such people may sometimes feel a kind of conflict. They feel this conflict because they want to be on the right side, on the right side, the side of propriety, and they don't want even unconsciously to do anything that is wrong. This sincerity or integrity is what really leads to conflicts. Arjuna's conflicts belong to that category. That's why Krishna's instructions worked. So, this is an important point. So, that's why Arjuna represents the majority of normal people living in the world. Okay.
Swamiji, can we take one more question from YouTube?
Yeah, please.
So, this is from Neil Wadwan. He's asking, how do we keep this yoga philosophy top of mind during our day-to-day life? How do we keep it in mind when we are in the middle of work, family, and social responsibilities? Like, how can we make it top of mind all the time?
Yeah. This is, I think Gita describes this in the 4th chapter. What it says, as an archetypal symbol, Gita uses the word Rajarshi. What it means is the efficiency, the success, the prosperity, the secular excellence of a king, and the non-attachment, the contemplative nature, the wisdom, the yogic wisdom of a saint combined. How do we combine? It's easy to practice enthusiasm, efficiency. Very easy. But how to practice non-attachment? That's a problem, that's true. Now, when we understand that there is something much higher than secular prosperity, secular success, success as we understand in normal life, there is something much more valuable, much higher than this success, and we should not lose sight of that higher ideal. When we can be convinced of this, then we will be able to practice non-attachment. When we remember the impermanence or what we call the transitoriness or the impermanence of every kind of worldly success, all kinds of secular prosperity, it's a fact. Money and wealth and health and status all will not last for long. They keep changing. But frequently we lose sight of this, which we know intellectually, but in the midst of our everyday activities, we may lose sight of this fact. Frequently we are reminded of the impermanence of everything that we consider to be valuable in worldly life. But that reminder sometimes can come in the form of an unpleasant, shocking experience. To avoid that, if you can keep in mind, the reality of the impermanence of all these things, then we will be able to remain active, efficient, at the same time, a little bit of this wisdom, non-attached. Means we will be ready when we get a shocking experience. That's the idea behind.
Thank you, Swami.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you all of you. Yeah. Thank you.